My husband threw me out after believing his mother's lies, saying, "The baby she's carrying is not yours, I saw her out with someone." I shouted, "It's a lie." And that's when her sister came up to me and started kicking me. If that wasn't enough, she grabbed a steel bar and began hitting me. I looked at my husband and he stood behind his mother while she was smirking and shouted, "I don't think it's enough, hit her more." Someone saw me and called 911. When they arrived, they tried to call my parents and they said, "We don't have any daughter." So I decided to destroy everyone's lives. My name is Irene, and this is the story of how I went from being a pregnant wife to someone who lost everything, and then systematically destroyed the lives of everyone who betrayed me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when my world collapsed. I was 4 months pregnant with what should have been our first child together. My husband Dale and I had been married for 3 years, and despite his mother Bonnie's constant interference, we'd been relatively happy. Or so I thought. I was coming home from my prenatal appointment, excited to share the ultrasound photos with Dale. The baby was healthy, growing perfectly, and I couldn't wait to see his face light up when he saw the new pictures. I walked through our front door, calling out his name, only to find him sitting in our living room with his mother Bonnie and her sister Connie. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and all three of them were staring at me with expressions I'd never seen before. "Dale? What's going on?" I asked, setting down my purse and the ultrasound photos. Bonnie stood up first, her face twisted with what looked like righteous anger. "Don't you dare act innocent, you little whore," she spat. "I saw you last week. I saw you with that man at the coffee shop downtown. Laughing, holding hands, looking real cozy." My heart started pounding. "What are you talking about? I don't know what you think you saw, but the baby she's carrying is not yours," Bonnie said, turning to Dale. "I saw her out with someone. They looked like they've been together for months. She's been lying to you this entire time." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dale, you can't possibly believe this. It's a lie. I've never been with anyone else. You know me better than this." Dale looked at me with eyes full of hurt and disgust. "My mother doesn't lie, Irene. She has no reason to make this up." "But she does have a reason," I protested, stepping toward him. "She's hated me since day one. She's never wanted us to be together." That's when Connie, Bonnie's sister, came up to me. Without warning, she started kicking me in the stomach and legs. I doubled over, trying to protect my belly, screaming for her to stop. "Connie, no," I gasped, but she didn't listen. If that wasn't enough, she grabbed a steel bar that Dale had left by the door from some home improvement project and began hitting me with it. The first blow caught me across the back, and I fell to my knees, curling into a ball to protect my unborn baby. I looked up at Dale through my tears, expecting him to stop this madness, to protect me and our child. Instead, he stood behind his mother while she was smirking down at me. What he said next will haunt me for the rest of my life. "I don't think it's enough, hit her more." Connie raised the bar again, and I genuinely thought they were going to kill me. I was bleeding, my vision was getting blurry, and all I could think about was my baby. Then I heard a voice shouting from outside. "Hey! What the hell is going on in there? I'm calling the police." It was our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who must have heard my screams. Someone saw me and called 911, and within minutes, I could hear sirens approaching. When the paramedics and police arrived, I was barely conscious. They found me on the living room floor, bleeding from multiple wounds, with Connie still holding the steel bar. Dale and Bonnie were trying to clean up the blood, as if that would somehow make this all go away. The paramedics rushed me to the hospital, and miraculously, my baby was okay. Bruised and shaken, but alive. I spent 4 days in the hospital, and during that time, the police tried to contact my family to let them know what had happened. They found my parents' contact information in my phone's emergency contacts, which I had never updated since our estrangement 3 years ago. That's when I received the second crushing blow. When the officers called my parents, my mother answered the phone. After hearing what had happened, she said something that shattered what was left of my heart: "We don't have any daughter." My own parents, who had disowned me when I married Dale against their wishes 3 years ago, refused to acknowledge my existence even in my darkest hour. The officer looked uncomfortable when he delivered the message, but I could see the pity in his eyes. Lying in that hospital bed, alone and betrayed by everyone I had or trusted, something inside me broke. But it wasn't the kind of break that leaves you defeated. It was the kind that forges you into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. So I decided to destroy everyone's lives. The first thing I did was document everything. Every injury, every hospital record, every police report. Connie was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, and Bonnie was charged as an accessory. Dale wasn't charged criminally, but I made sure he knew his nightmare was just beginning. While I was still in the hospital, I called my lawyer, Lucy Campbell, whom I'd met through work. She was a family law attorney with a reputation for being ruthless when her clients were wronged. When I told her what happened, she was appalled and immediately agreed to take my case. "Irene, what they did to you is unforgivable," Lucy said during our first official meeting. "We're going to make them pay for this in every way possible." The first lawsuit was against Connie for assault and battery. The evidence was overwhelming: the police report, hospital records, witness testimony from Mrs. Henderson, and the fact that she was caught red-handed with the weapon. We sued her for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and emotional distress. The amount? $500,000. Lucy was meticulous in building our case against Connie. We spent weeks gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and documenting every aspect of the attack. The medical records alone painted a horrifying picture. I had suffered 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, multiple contusions, and could have easily lost Emma due to the trauma. During Connie's deposition, she tried to claim self-defense, saying that I had attacked Bonnie first. When Lucy pressed her on this obvious lie, Connie became flustered and contradicted herself multiple times. The court reporter was barely able to keep up with her changing story. "So you're telling me," Lucy said, her voice calm but deadly, "that my client, who was 6 months pregnant, somehow posed such a threat to a healthy 45-year-old woman and her 62-year-old sister that you felt justified in beating her with a steel bar?" Connie's lawyer, a public defender who was clearly in over his head, objected weakly. But the damage was done. Connie had no credible defense, and everyone in that room knew it. The civil trial was even more devastating for Connie. Lucy had arranged for photographs of my injuries to be displayed prominently in the courtroom. The jury, composed mostly of parents and grandparents, looked physically ill when they saw what Connie had done to a pregnant woman. During my testimony, I made sure to be completely composed and factual. I didn't need to embellish or dramatize anything, the truth was damning enough. When I described looking at Dale and seeing him encourage more violence, several jurors wiped away tears. Connie's testimony was a disaster. She came across as cold, unremorseful, and completely detached from the reality of what she had done. When Lucy asked her if she regretted her actions, Connie actually said, "I was defending my sister. I'd do it again." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict in my favor for the full amount we had requested. Connie broke down crying when the judgment was read, finally realizing the magnitude of what her actions would cost her. Connie, who worked as a secretary at a small insurance company, didn't have that kind of money. The lawsuit forced her to sell her house, drain her retirement savings, and declare bankruptcy. But watching her lose her material possessions wasn't enough for me. I wanted her to understand that actions have consequences that extend far beyond money. I hired a private investigator named Pete Chen to dig into Connie's life. Pete was a former police detective who had started his own agency after retiring from the force. He was thorough, discreet, and had connections throughout the city that proved invaluable. "I'll find whatever there is to find," Pete assured me during our first meeting. People who are capable of what she did to you usually have other skeletons in their closets. Pete was right. What he found was a goldmine of information that would destroy Connie even further. Turns out, Connie had been embezzling money from her employer for over 2 years, skimming small amounts from client accounts that she thought no one would notice. The scheme was actually quite sophisticated. Connie would identify dormant accounts, clients who hadn't made claims or contacted the company in over a year. She would then create false administrative fees and redirect those payments to a personal account she had set up under a slightly altered version of the company name. Pete discovered that Connie had stolen over $80,000 using this method through her company's computer system, which she had administrative access to as a secretary. She had been using the money to fund a gambling addiction that her family didn't even know about. Every weekend, she drove to a casino 2 hours away and lost thousands of dollars playing slot machines and blackjack. "She's got credit card debt up to her eyeballs," Pete reported. The gambling, plus trying to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford, created a perfect storm. That's probably why she was so angry and violent. People under that kind of financial pressure often lash out. I anonymously tipped off the insurance company and provided them with detailed financial records that Pete had uncovered. I made sure to package the information professionally, with clear documentation and a paper trail that would be easy for investigators to follow. The insurance company's response was swift and brutal. They immediately froze Connie's access to their systems, launched an internal investigation, and contacted law enforcement. Connie was arrested at her desk on a Thursday morning, let out in handcuffs in front of all her coworkers. The local newspaper covered the story, running a headline that read "Insurance Secretary Arrested for Embezzlement." The article mentioned that Connie was also facing a civil lawsuit for assault and battery, connecting her criminal behavior to her violence against me. Connie was fired immediately, arrested for embezzlement, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Her career was over, her reputation was ruined, and she lost everything she had worked for. But I still wasn't finished with her. While Connie was awaiting sentencing, I discovered that she had two adult children, Stephen and Michelle, who lived in other states. They had both distanced themselves from their mother over the years due to her erratic behavior and constant drama, but they still maintained minimal contact. I reached out to them through social media, not to cause them harm, but to ensure they knew the full truth about what their mother had done. I sent them copies of the court records, photos of my injuries, and the medical reports detailing how their mother's actions could have killed both me and my unborn child. Stephen, the older of the two, was appalled. He wrote back immediately, apologizing profusely and explaining that he had cut his mother out of his life years ago because of her violent tendencies and inability to take responsibility for her actions. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," Stephen wrote. "I've been afraid she would seriously hurt someone for years. My wife and I don't allow her around our children because of incidents like this. I hope you and your baby are okay." Michelle's response was different but equally telling. She wasn't surprised by her mother's actions, but she was angry that Connie had embarrassed the family again. Michelle worked as a teacher and was worried that her mother's criminal conviction would somehow affect her career. Both children completely cut ties with Connie after learning the full extent of what she had done. When Connie was sentenced to prison 18 months later, neither of her children attended the hearing. She sat alone at the defendant's table, finally understanding that her actions had cost her not just her freedom and financial security, but her family as well. The 3 years Connie spent in prison were reportedly difficult. Pete kept tabs on her through his contacts in the system, and word was that Connie struggled with the regimented environment and had several altercations with other inmates who didn't appreciate her attitude. She was released after serving 2.5 years for good behavior, but the world she returned to was very different from the one she had left. Her house had been sold to pay legal fees and restitution. Her children wanted nothing to do with her. Her friends had abandoned her. She was a convicted felon with no prospects and nowhere to go. Connie ended up in a halfway house, working minimum wage jobs and struggling with the reality that her moment of violence had destroyed her entire life. The last update I received from Pete was that she was working as a night janitor at an office building, living in a studio apartment and barely making ends meet. The woman who had once felt entitled to be the pregnant woman with a steel bar was now completely powerless, alone, and facing the consequences of her actions every single day. That knowledge gave me a satisfaction that no amount of money ever could. But Connie was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, I systematically went after everyone who had betrayed me. Bonnie was next. The charges against her for being an accessory to assault resulted in probation and community service, but I wasn't relying on the criminal justice system alone. I sued her for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit assault. During the discovery process, my lawyer subpoenaed Bonnie's phone records, social media accounts, and bank statements. What we found was evidence that Bonnie had been planning this attack for months. She had been following me, taking pictures, and had even hired someone to create fake photos of me with another man. The man that I was supposedly having an affair with? It was Bonnie's nephew, Marcus, whom she had paid to pose for photographs that were digitally manipulated to look like we were together. Marcus, feeling guilty about what had happened to me, came forward with the truth and provided us with text messages where Bonnie had explicitly outlined her plan to destroy my marriage. With this evidence, we were able to prove that Bonnie had orchestrated a deliberate campaign to ruin my life. The jury awarded me $750,000 in damages, an amount that forced Bonnie to sell her house and move in with relatives. But again, I wasn't finished. Bonnie worked as a supervisor at a local government office, a job she had held for 15 years and was very proud of. Using the evidence from our lawsuit, I filed a complaint with her employer about her conduct and moral character. The government office, not wanting to be associated with someone who had orchestrated such a vicious attack, terminated her employment. At 62 years old, Bonnie found herself unemployed, broke, and unemployable. No one wanted to hire someone with her legal history and public notoriety. She had to move in with distant relatives in another state, completely dependent on others for the first time in her adult life. Now for Dale, the man who had promised to love and protect me, who had stood by and encouraged his family to beat his pregnant wife. Dale's betrayal cut the deepest because I had trusted him completely. We had shared dreams, planned our future together, and I had believed he would always have my back. Discovering that he was capable of such cruelty required a special kind of revenge. The divorce proceedings were brutal, and I made sure they were as public and humiliating as possible. With Lucy's help, I was able to prove that Dale had abandoned his responsibility to protect me and our child, and had actively participated in the assault by encouraging it. After Emma was born 5 months later, I immediately arranged for a DNA test. Dale initially resisted, probably hoping to maintain some plausible deniability about the baby's parentage, but Lucy made it clear that his cooperation would reflect better on him during the proceedings. The DNA test results were unequivocal. There was a 99.99% probability that Dale was the father. When those results were read aloud in court, Dale visibly slumped in his chair. His own mother had convinced him to abandon his wife and unborn child based on complete lies, and now everyone in that courtroom knew it. Your Honor, Lucy addressed the judge during one of our hearings, we have a man who not only believed outrageous lies about his wife without any investigation whatsoever, but who actively encouraged violence against his pregnant wife and unborn child. The DNA evidence proves that Mr. Watson abandoned his family based on fabricated accusations. Dale's lawyer, a sleazy divorce attorney named Roy Morrison who was known for taking hopeless cases, tried to argue that Dale had been misled by his mother and was as much a victim as I was. This argument backfired spectacularly when Lucy presented audio recordings I had made during our marriage counseling sessions months before the attack. In those recordings, which I had legally made with the counselor's permission, Dale expressed resentment about his mother's interference in our marriage but admitted he was too weak to stand up to her. The counselor had specifically warned Dale that his failure to establish boundaries with his mother was damaging our marriage and could lead to serious problems. So you knew your mother was a problem, Lucy said during Dale's deposition. You knew she was trying to interfere in your marriage. You had professional advice about how to handle the situation. And yet when she made these accusations against your wife, you immediately believed her without question? Dale stammered through his response, unable to provide any coherent justification for his actions. It became clear that he had wanted to believe his mother's lies because they gave him an excuse to escape what he saw as the responsibilities of marriage and fatherhood. In our state, marital misconduct is considered during divorce proceedings, and Dale's actions qualified as extreme cruelty. I was awarded the house, his car, 60% of our assets, and substantial alimony. He was also ordered to pay child support for our daughter, Emma, who was born healthy 5 months after the attack. But the financial settlement was just the beginning of Dale's problems. I had learned during our marriage that Dale was deeply concerned with his professional reputation and social standing. He took pride in being seen as a successful engineer and a good guy. I was going to systematically destroy both of those things. He worked as an engineer at Hoffman Engineering, a prestigious firm that specialized in commercial construction projects. Dale had been with the company for 7 years and was being considered for a partnership track. His colleagues respected him, and his boss had often praised his technical skills and professionalism. I made sure that changed. First, I reached out to a local investigative journalist named Amanda Foster who worked for the city's main newspaper. Amanda had a reputation for covering social justice issues and had written several articles about domestic violence in our community. I have a story you might be interested in, I told Amanda during our initial phone conversation. It's about a local engineer who encouraged his family to assault his pregnant wife, and how the system failed to protect a victim of domestic violence. Amanda was immediately interested. Domestic violence stories, especially ones involving professional men who appeared respectable on the surface, were exactly the kind of journalism she specialized in. We met for coffee, and I provided her with copies of police reports, court documents, medical records, and photographs of my injuries. This is horrific, Amanda said, reviewing the documents. You're telling me he actually told them to hit you more? That's exactly what happened, I confirmed. And there's more. His mother fabricated evidence of an affair, hired someone to create fake photographs, and orchestrated this entire attack to destroy our marriage. Dale never questioned any of it. Amanda spent 2 weeks investigating the story, interviewing witnesses, reviewing court documents, and attempting to get comments from Dale and his family. None of them would speak to her, which only made them look more guilty. The article was published on a Sunday morning with the headline "Local Engineer Encouraged Family to Beat Pregnant Wife." It was featured prominently on the newspaper's website and included several photographs, a professional headshot of Dale from his company's website, a photo of Hoffman Engineering's office building, and carefully cropped images of some of my injuries. The story went viral on local social media within hours. Dale's colleagues, friends, and professional contacts were all sharing and commenting on the article. The response was overwhelmingly negative, with people expressing shock that someone they had considered respectable could do such a thing. Dale's employers were not pleased when the local news picked up our story. Hoffman Engineering prided itself on being a family-friendly company with strong values. Having one of their engineers publicly associated with domestic violence was a nightmare for their public relations team. The company's response was swift. Dale was called into a meeting with HR on Monday morning and placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. They claimed this was standard procedure for any employee who was facing serious legal issues, but everyone knew what it really meant. During the internal investigation, I made sure that additional damaging information found its way to Dale's employer. Through Pete Chen, my private investigator, I discovered that Dale had been using company resources for personal projects, including using the company's 3D printer and CAD software to create items he was selling online. This wasn't technically illegal, but it violated company policy and gave Hoffman Engineering additional grounds for termination. The investigation, aided by some strategic leaking of information from court documents and tips about Dale's policy violations, resulted in Dale being terminated for conduct unbecoming of a professional. The termination letter, which I obtained through a contact at the company, cited both the domestic violence incident and the misuse of company resources. It also noted that Dale's continued employment would be inconsistent with the company's values and commitment to family safety. Dale tried to fight the termination, hiring an employment lawyer and claiming he was being discriminated against. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and his lawyer eventually advised him to accept a small severance package in exchange for agreeing not to pursue further legal action. The engineering community in our region began to view Dale with suspicion and distrust. While a complete blacklist wasn't realistic, word traveled through professional networks, and many firms were hesitant to hire someone with his history. Dale found his options severely limited and was eventually forced to take a job as a maintenance worker at a factory, earning a fraction of his previous salary. But his professional destruction was only part of my plan. Dale had always been concerned with how others perceived him, so I made sure that his social circle knew exactly who he really was. I also made sure that Dale's friends and extended family knew exactly what kind of person he was. I created a detailed social media post with photos of my injuries, hospital records, and court documents, explaining what had happened. The post went viral in our local community, and Dale became a pariah. Dale had always been popular in our social circle. He was the kind of guy who organized poker nights, fantasy football leagues, and group outings to sporting events. His friends saw him as reliable, funny, and trustworthy. They had no idea what he was really capable of when the pressure was on. I systematically reached out to each of Dale's close friends, starting with his college roommate Jason, who had been the best man at our wedding. Jason was shocked when I contacted him through Facebook Messenger and told him what had happened. "Irene, I can't believe this," Jason wrote back. "Are you sure there isn't some misunderstanding? This doesn't sound like the Dale I know." I sent Jason copies of a police report, photos of my injuries, and the audio recording of Dale telling Connie to hit me more. I also included the DNA test results proving that Emma was definitely Dale's child, contradicting the lies his mother had spread. Jason's response came 3 hours later: "I don't know what to say. I'm disgusted. I had no idea Dale could do something like this. I'm so sorry this happened to you and Emma." Within a week, Jason had shared the information with their entire friend group from college. The group chat they had maintained for 10 years suddenly went silent whenever Dale tried to participate. When he suggested their annual golf trip, no one responded. When he invited people to his birthday party, only 2 people showed up, and they left early. Dale's work friends were equally horrified when they learned the truth. His former colleague Brent Williams, who had been one of his closest friends at Hoffman Engineering, publicly stated that he was sickened by Dale's actions and that their friendship was over. "I have a wife and daughter," Brent told mutual friends. "The thought that someone I trusted could stand by while his pregnant wife was beaten with a steel bar makes me physically ill. I never want to see Dale Watson again." Dale tried to defend himself by claiming that he had been manipulated by his mother and that he was sorry for what happened. But his excuses fell on deaf ears. People couldn't get past the image of him encouraging violence against his pregnant wife, and no apology seemed adequate for that level of betrayal. His friends stopped talking to him. Dale's extended family was disgusted by his behavior, particularly when they learned the full truth. His uncle Thomas actually called me to apologize on behalf of the family and to express his disgust with Dale's actions. "What Dale did is unforgivable," Uncle Thomas said. "I've known that boy since he was born, and I never thought he could do something like this. You and that baby deserve so much better." Dale was also removed from his volunteer position as a youth group helper at his church after the pastor received multiple complaints from congregation members who had learned about the incident. "We believe in redemption and forgiveness," Reverend Matthews explained to Dale during their final meeting. "But we also have a responsibility to protect the families in our congregation. Your presence here makes people uncomfortable, especially the women and children." Everywhere he went in town, people often recognized him from the news articles and social media posts. The recognition wasn't universal, but it was frequent enough to be uncomfortable. Waitresses at restaurants would give him cold looks. Cashiers at stores would whisper to each other when they saw him. Children at the playground would be called away by their parents when Dale walked by. The isolation was complete and devastating. Dale had built his entire identity around being liked and respected, and I had systematically destroyed both of those things. He tried to rebuild his social life by joining new groups and activities, but word always seemed to travel ahead of him. When Dale tried to join a recreational softball league, several players threatened to quit if he was allowed to participate. When he attempted to volunteer at a local charity, other volunteers complained to the organization's leadership about his presence. He couldn't escape the consequences of his actions, no matter where he went. The psychological impact on Dale was severe. Friends who still had minimal contact with him reported that he had become withdrawn, depressed, and bitter. He blamed everyone else for his situation, me for ruining his life, his mother for lying to him, his friends for abandoning him, and society for being unforgiving. But Dale never seemed to truly understand that his current situation was entirely self-inflicted. He had chosen to believe his mother's lies without investigation. He had chosen to throw me out of our home. He had chosen to stand by and encourage violence against his pregnant wife. Every consequence he was facing was a direct result of those choices. The financial pressures were enormous as well. Between the alimony, child support, legal fees, and his drastically reduced income, Dale was struggling to make ends meet. He had to move from our nice suburban home to a cramped apartment in a rough part of town. He sold his truck and started driving a beat-up Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles on it. Dale's mother Bonnie, who had caused all of this with her lies, was dealing with her own consequences and was unable to help him financially or emotionally. The family that had once seemed so united in their hatred of me was now fractured and dealing with the aftermath of their actions. The most satisfying part was knowing that Dale would have to live with the consequences of his choices for the rest of his life. Every time someone Googled his name, they would find the news articles about what he had done. Every job application, every potential romantic relationship, every new social situation would be complicated by his history. He had traded a loving wife, a beautiful daughter, a successful career, and a good reputation for a moment of cowardice and cruelty. The man who had once seemed to have everything was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of weak character and blind loyalty to toxic family members. But I still wasn't finished. Remember, my own parents had disowned me in my moment of greatest need. They deserved their own special punishment. My parents, Robert and Margaret Johnson, were pillars of their community. My father was a deacon at their church, and my mother was president of the local women's auxiliary. They had always been concerned with appearances and social status, which is why they had cut me off when I married Dale against their wishes. Using my maiden name, I created several anonymous social media accounts and began sharing the story of how they had abandoned their daughter and grandchild in our darkest hour. I included screenshots of text messages I had sent them over the years, trying to reconcile, and their cold responses rejecting any contact. The story I crafted was designed to appeal to their religious community's values. I titled it Parents Abandon Pregnant Daughter After Brutal Assault and shared it in local community groups, church forums, and social media pages. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Members of their church were appalled that a deacon would turn his back on his own child and grandchild. The women's auxiliary voted to remove my mother from her position as president. My parents found themselves ostracized from the community they had worked so hard to impress. But I took it one step further. My father owned a small accounting business that relied heavily on referrals from church members and community connections. As word spread about how they had treated me, clients began taking their business elsewhere. Within 6 months, my father's business had lost over half of its clientele. The financial strain, combined with the social isolation, put tremendous pressure on my parents' marriage. They had built their entire identity around being respected members of their community, and I had systematically dismantled that reputation. My mother had a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for stress-related symptoms. My father, faced with a failing business and a wife who could barely function, finally reached out to me through a mutual acquaintance, begging for forgiveness and asking me to call off the dogs. It was too late for apologies. During all of this, I was raising my daughter Emma as a single mother. She was a beautiful, healthy baby who looked exactly like Dale, which only made his betrayal more infuriating. But Emma gave me purpose and motivation to keep fighting. I had documented everything, every court proceeding, every victory, every moment when my enemies realized they had underestimated me. I started a blog called Fighting Back, One Woman's Journey from Victim to Victor, where I shared my story and offered advice to other women who had been betrayed and abandoned. The blog gained a following, and I was invited to speak at women's empowerment events and legal seminars about domestic violence and family betrayal. I turned my pain into purpose, and my story became an inspiration to others who had been wronged. 1 year after that terrible Tuesday afternoon, I stood in the nursery I had decorated for Emma, looking at my sleeping daughter. Every person who had betrayed me was suffering the consequences of their actions. Connie was in prison, broke and unemployable. Bonnie was living in exile, dependent on relatives and unable to find work. Dale was working a menial job, socially ostracized and struggling to make his court-ordered payments. My parents had lost their social standing, their business was failing, and their marriage was in shambles. Some people might say I went too far, that revenge consumed me and turned me into someone I shouldn't be proud of. But I disagree. I didn't start this fight. I was minding my own business, coming home from a prenatal appointment to share happy news with my husband. They attacked me, betrayed me, and abandoned me when I was at my most vulnerable. What I did wasn't revenge, it was justice. I used the legal system, told the truth, and allowed natural consequences to unfold. I didn't fabricate evidence or make false accusations. I simply made sure that everyone knew exactly who these people were and what they were capable of. The most satisfying moment came 8 months after Emma was born. I was at the grocery store with her when I ran into Dale. He looked terrible, thinner, older, defeated. He approached me hesitantly, and I could see he wanted to say something about Emma. "She's beautiful," he said quietly, looking at his daughter with obvious regret. "Yes, she is," I replied coldly. "And she's mine. You made your choice that day." "Irene, I cut him off. "You don't get to have regrets now. You don't get to see what you lost and wish you could take it back. You showed me who you really are, and I believed you." He stood there for a moment, looking like he might cry, before walking away without another word. That was the last time I saw him outside of court hearings for child support modifications. 2 years later, I was thriving. I had built a successful consulting business helping other women navigate legal battles against abusive family members and ex-partners. Emma was a happy, healthy toddler who would never know the people who had tried to destroy her before she was even born. I bought a beautiful house in a better neighborhood, far from all the people who had betrayed me. I was financially secure, emotionally healed, and surrounded by new friends who valued loyalty and honesty. Sometimes people ask me if I ever feel guilty about what I did to my family and Dale's family. The answer is no. They made choices that revealed their true character, and I simply ensured that their character was widely known and appropriately judged. Connie chose to assault a pregnant woman with a deadly weapon. Bonnie chose to orchestrate a campaign of lies and violence against her son's wife. Dale chose to stand by and encourage violence against his pregnant wife. My parents chose to abandon their daughter and grandchild in our darkest hour. I didn't choose any of that for them, they chose it for themselves. I just made sure they lived with the consequences. The only regret I have is that I wasted 3 years of my life trusting people who didn't deserve it. But even that wasn't entirely wasted time, because it taught me valuable lessons about recognizing genuine character versus the masks people wear. Emma will grow up knowing that her mother is someone who doesn't accept betrayal, who fights back when wronged, and who never gives up. She'll know that family isn't always blood, and that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who are supposed to love you. Most importantly, she'll know that being a victim is temporary, but being a survivor is a choice. And I chose to be more than a survivor, I chose to be someone who fights back and wins. Looking back on that terrible day when my world fell apart, I can honestly say it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because of the pain and betrayal, but because it revealed everyone's true colors and gave me the motivation to build a better life for myself and my daughter. I destroyed their lives the same way they tried to destroy mine, systematically, methodically, and completely. The only difference is that they deserved it. And I'm not sorry.